Welcome out. I'm glad you're joining us tonight for our Tuesday night podcast. And we are going to be talking tonight about seeing but not believing. Pretty plain and simple. There's no hidden meaning behind the title. That's exactly what we're going to talk about, seeing but not believing. And there was a few different things that kind of led me in this direction. But before we get completely into it, I just want to remind everybody that we do open this up for questions. Ask questions. Doesn't matter what the question is, just ask questions. We are. You can put those in the chat box. That's the reason why we keep it open, is for questions, and we can help you learn tonight. And so, I don't even have this pulled up here. Okay, seeing but not believing. All right, so this was kind of again a branch off of our last podcast, as the last one was, and you mentioned about Elon Musk and people that follow Elon Musk compared to people that don't follow Elon Musk, or that hear about it, but they're like, I'm not going that route. I'm not going to take the chance. I'm not going to risk on what I don't know. And so one of the things that kind of pushed this, I had a conversation with a guy on Saturday. We go out every Saturday and we talk to people and tell people about Jesus. And I was in a conversation with a guy who said pretty boldly, I'm an atheist. And I said, are you a real atheist, or, are you just unsure? And he said, yeah, I'm a diehard atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't believe there is a God. And he's of the mindset that if God was real, there wouldn't be suffering in the earth, or either that or God's a very petty God and he refuses to worship a God like that. And so there were these like two different kind of stances that he made, but all of them with the opposition against God. And I asked him if he'd just give me a few minutes of time. It was already kind of towards the end of the outreach. And so I decided to just spend some time with him and see where his mind out was with the whole thing. And he said he'd give me a few minutes. And so as we were talking, I'm presenting logic. I'm presenting, just simple evidence. And at the end of the conversation, without going into the whole conversation, at the end of it, he said, you choose to believe what you want to believe. And I'm okay with that. And he said, I'm going to choose to believe there is no God. And in the end, I'll be really happy if you're right. And so the thing that kind of struck me in relation to this podcast was the idea of the logic that the conclusion that he came to was the fact that if God wouldn't come down and stop evil people from doing bad things to other people, then he's not real. It doesn't exist. No God, the God that people, we've heard this, no loving God would let suffering in the earth happen and stuff like that. And so he said, I asked him what the solution would be. Like what in your mind, what would be the solution? And he said, God should just come down and, basically take the idea of choice away, so we can't make bad decisions. And so he's making a decision to refusing, in his words, not to believe in God, because God won't take away his choice to choose, or his freedom to choose, right? And so the reason why I ask all that, or why I mention all that, is because this idea of having evidence in front of you, but then making a decision against the evidence is something we run into a lot with witnessing to people and telling people about Jesus. You present evidence to them and things that are plain and things that are simple, but there's this block in human nature that prevents people from either acknowledging it or accepting it. So first question is, what is the thing in human nature and choice and intentions that either blinds us to or motivates us to reject evidence?
Well, I think it's funny the way that you mentioned it, because you talked about how this guy is he's made a decision. Oh, mine's just a sec. My volume's really super high. Second.
Bear with us for 1 minute while we're figuring out sound.
Yeah, it looks like it's probably distorting. 1 second. Okay. Here we go. Oops. I think that'll be better. 1, 2. Yeah. Okay, that looks better. So here's somebody who's saying that God should take away our free will, and then that way nobody would hurt anybody. So why is that God's fault?
Yeah.
Because I mean, he's admitting that the problem is not God. He's admitting that the problem is man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if God didn't give us free will, we wouldn't do the things that we're doing. And so that's, it's people believe what they want to believe because they have a free will to be able to make those kinds of decisions. And that's what you're seeing in that kind of a conversation is just that. It's just somebody who is exercising their free will.
Yeah. And
that proves that God exists.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't have a free will, then we probably, like he says, we wouldn't be doing the things that we're doing. But we do have a free will, but yet we don't just do whatever either.
Yeah.
We have a free will within, that has some sort of moral compass associated with it. So really what it comes down to is that people choose to believe what they want to believe. And the way that we are able to rationalize what we believe is by just simply justifying things.
Yeah.
We throw away some evidence and hang on to others. And so we're just biased. I mean, when it comes right down to it.
Mm. I actually had the beginning of the conversation where he's talking a lot about, when he mentions or has conversations with Christians about God, he often gets the answer that, well, that's just, the questions you're asking, there's too much we just don't know and we can't answer. God's so much bigger than that, we just can't understand all of it. And in some ways he's right. That is a cop-out answer because there's a lot of answers that God gives us in Scripture. But what's interesting about it is the fact that even through having the evidence presented to you, you just flat out choose not to acknowledge it, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the idea, the thought that it's possible, that I always it's a straw man argument. I talk to Christians, and this is what Christians say, mm-hmm. and I doubt it. I highly doubt it. I highly doubt that's what he said. Number one, I highly doubt that he talks to many Christians.
Yeah, because
you had to practically beg him to give you time to talk. Mm-hmm. So he's not having conversations with Christians. These are people that he knows, and there may be 2, 3, mm-hmm. That he knows, but now that they represent all of Christendom, worldwide, and again, it just shows that how much of it is that we just believe what we want to believe, and we're willing to accept any lack or amount of evidence that's there.
Yeah.
Even if it's only 2 or 3 people saying what 7.5 billion people are not saying, everybody says, mm-hmm. And that we use that phrase a lot. Everybody says.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about this idea, and this is kind of where where I started thinking about actually using this for a topic, I was trying to think of a scripture that would just kind of simplify the idea that I'm after. And so in Luke 16, I won't read the whole thing, but the story, Jesus is telling a story about a rich man and a poor man named Lazarus. And, basically Lazarus is really poor. He'd eat from scraps he would eat scraps, and Lazarus was just basically lived at this guy's gate. And this guy never gave Lazarus the time of day from that standpoint. He didn't try to help him or anything like that. So they both die. Lazarus ends up in heaven, and the rich man ends up in hell. And then he looks up and he sees Abraham he's in hell. He sees Abraham, he sees Lazarus in this expanse or this gap between him, and they can't reach each other, but they can see each other. And he tells Abraham, send Lazarus to my family's home. I have 5 brothers there. If they see someone from the dead and he goes to them, they'll repent. Mm-hmm. Those are his words. And then Abraham says, no, they have Moses, or they have the law and the prophets. Yeah. And then he says, no, but if somebody goes from the dead, they'll repent. And then he says, if they would not receive Moses and the prophets, neither will they repent if they see a man who's risen from the dead.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is there's this actually the words that Abraham uses is, if they did not listen to Abraham and the prophets, or to Moses and the prophets, then they would not believe if a man rose from the dead. Now, one is seeing, the other is hearing. And he's basically saying, if you don't believe when you hear, you won't believe when you see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is the connection between, And I mean, there's so many different facets to the
Yeah.
scripture, but what is the connection between listening and believing? Or being convinced, because that's actually the word he used. That's
Okay.
what I'm after. Convinced.
Yeah. Well, I'm laughing. I'm trying to formulate how to say it all at the same time, because this is probably the number one issue when it comes to our existence in general, is that if you can't listen, then you can't be convinced. But it's the other way around. It's a lack of desire to be convinced that causes us to not listen. And if you ever hear, we've all done it. I mean, that's the bottom line, is we've all done it. You hear somebody talking about something, like, say, for example, if you're a conservative and you hear somebody who's liberal, and they're talking about, or maybe probably a better way of to this one be more specific, is somebody who you don't believe that there's a such thing as climate change, and you hear somebody who's there talking about how important it is, we need to do something right now, we don't have any time left, and even if they give statistics, even if they start to talk very rational and very calmly and try to communicate truth, if you're not somebody who is open to the idea that our climate is in trouble, you're going to shut down. You're going to listen to him and you're going to go blah, blah, blah. You're not going to listen. And he could be telling the truth. He could be saying everything. He could have all kinds of evidence and being able to bring in a army of scientists and have different people speak at different levels. And you're just going to go, whatever, because we don't want to hear. And that's the issue, is, being able to hear.
Yeah.
And so he says that if and that's the idea, is we won't be convinced if we won't listen. Seeing it's not going to make any difference, because that the indicator is shutting down. If they had, because there's no reason for them to not listen to Moses and the prophets, and any more evidence is not going to make them more convinced, because it's not. Seeing is not believing. That's a misnomer, because this is something that scientifically is proven. We don't always believe what we see.
Yeah.
It's often that we'll actually see things and say, no, I don't believe that. And that's all there's to it, because we don't want to see it, because we don't want to believe it.
Yeah. Okay. So we actually talked about this last night. And by the way, that statement, seeing but not believing, or seeing is believing, comes from Greek. It's actually Greek mythology. So it's based around fantasy, the whole thing. And so, or it comes from the context of fantasy. But the conversation we had, you mentioned this idea of having a narrative. And specifically what you just mentioned is talking about having a narrative in one direction or another.
Yeah.
I approached this guy as a Christian. He said he's an atheist. Automatically, we both have a narrative. And he's predicting what I'm going to say, or at least trying to anticipate what I'm going to say. And I'm gauging what kind of atheist he is, and I'm trying to predict what he's going to say. And so automatically, we both have an opinion of each other. We've never talked. We've never met before this moment. We've never had any conversations. But the second you mention atheist and Christian, there's a narrative in both mind, right? So how do you break the narrative? Because one of us was right and one of us is wrong. And so when it comes to the issue of eternity, when it comes to the issue of destiny, when it comes to the issue of growth, maturity, all of that depends on you being able to break the narrative, right? How do you break the narrative?
Me personally, how I've been able to do that is, when I engage in anything having to do that, where there is a preconceived idea, number one, in myself, I've found that the more people that you know, the more that you read, the more that you open your mind. I read on climate change. I read books by conservative politicians. I read books by atheists. I read books by Christians. I think the best way is first of all is the idea is that I don't have a narrative, me personally. You see, when you have a narrative, and you start saying, this is the way the world is, and this is how things work, and this is what this is, and this is what that is, and then you create a narrative, what ends up happening is that you are creating your own world, your own universe, and somebody can say something to you, and your response to that can be, yes, you're right, no, you're wrong, without anything else. Because that's how a narrative works. Mariah's asking the question, what does it mean having a narrative? It's the idea of just how you view life, how you view a situation, and the idea of that this is the way things work. This is the idea of how things are. And we do this with individuals. You do this, you're like that. You do this other thing. This person does this person's like that. And we categorize and pigeonhole everything in life in a certain place. And when we do that, number one, we're wrong because the whole world doesn't fit into those boxes. Number two is that we are not in a situation to where we will be able to actually have a good conversation with somebody, because anybody, especially somebody who is open-minded, is going to realize that you are closed-minded, because you're going to begin to rehearse your narrative. You're going to be telling them, listen, the sun comes up every day at 7 o'clock. It goes down at 7 o'clock every day. This is the way it works. During the winter, it's cold. During the summer, it's hot. And that's all there is to it. And they're going to look at you and they're going to go, yeah, whatever, because you're telling them things that are stereotypically true, but realistically not. And or that there's lots of differences. And so when it comes to dealing with life and issues like that, you have to be responsible for both sides of the conversation. Number one, that you aren't a narrative yourself, and number two, that you don't believe them as a narrative. Like you're saying, when I talk to people, I don't try to predict what they're going to say. I don't expect any. I'm listening to what they're saying so that I can know what they're thinking. Not I think this is what they're thinking, and let me see if it comes true by what they say. It's not going to be like that. I do it from the other way around, where is I wait for them to answer, and then I say, okay, so you believe in evolution. Okay, fine. So what about evolution do you believe? Do you believe evolution like at a scientific level? Do you believe in evolution like everybody believes in evolution? Do you believe in evolution because of some particular ideas? What is it you're thinking of? Or, and from that standpoint, and that way, I'm able to, first of all, break the classic Christian narrative is that I'm right, you're wrong. And because the issue isn't I'm right, you're wrong. The issue is there's a such thing as truth. And even that people will complain or fight over is the idea. Somebody will say, well, I think all truth is relative. Okay, well, fine. Let's talk about this. Not, okay, you're wrong because truth is not relative. It's let's talk about this. Let's put it to the test. And everything I do that with is always, okay, let's put that to the test. And I try to think of questions to ask in situations like that, where I'm trying to help people to understand what it is that I believe. I try to do it from the standpoint of what do I need to know what they believe and where they are, and then I want to try to lead them from where they are to where I am. I'm not trying to change the way they think, and by trying to knock down all their ideas. I'm trying to do it by saying, okay, you believe this. Well, what about that? Do you believe it, to its logical conclusion? And that's the interesting thing is that I think a lot of people, the things that they believe, they don't believe them because they believe them to a logical conclusion. They believe them because it's what they want to believe. And so if I can get the opportunity to be able to walk down the logical conclusion, challenge the ideas, challenge the thinking, then I can often, bring them to a place at the very least where they say, well, I'm glad we talked, and that you've given me something to think about, rather than, the idea of it just being completely closed and well, okay, my way or the highway, I'm not interested in your religion, and so I guess we're done with this conversation. It's not like that. I may not even leave them with the idea of getting saved. I may leave them with the idea that I believe this to be true, and I'm giving you the understanding that there's things that you can do right now to prove this. And then they say, okay, well, let me go away, and think about that. You can get saved. I started doing that a lot ever since the series of meetings that I was in Tucson, talking about, a one-to-one evangelism with people, just, bringing them to a place of decision, saying, you can know Jesus right now. We can pray right now. You can know Jesus. He can come into your heart and he can forgive your sins. I mean, there's so much in that, there's so much in that in terms of we don't need to talk about what we believe anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, are you willing to try? No, I'm not willing to try. I want to just believe what I believe without evidence. Okay. That's fine. But we've proven the fact that you don't believe it because you have evidence. We've proven that you just want this to be real, this to be true. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I think, probably a more important way to leave a conversation is, okay, you say you believe this, but it is just a belief. Mm-hmm. And, I tried to go to where we could actually, put facts behind all this stuff, and you don't want to go there. So, mm-hmm. Okay, but that doesn't make you right just because you believe something. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the only way you can really get anywhere in a conversation with any human being, mm-hmm. because it is true. All our lives we have believed certain things to be true, and we've just believed them. One of the difficulties I have, sometimes people, they can be saved 10, 15, 20 years, but they've come from a religious background and they believe things that are not true. They're not biblically true, but because they heard that as a kid, they figured it must be true. And from a biblical standpoint, it's not true, but they're a Christian. They believe in God. They've been in a relationship with God, but this thing's not true. This particular element is not true, not biblical, not even a part of anything that has to do with the truth. But yet they still believe it because it's what they were taught when they were little. And so there's a lot of that. It's one of the things that I thought was interesting growing up is going to school, in grade school. They teach you a lot of stuff in grade school, and then you go to college, and then they teach you entirely different stuff. It's contradictory, especially when it comes to the issue of the history of the world. Is thinking, well, it's like this and like that. We're taught, our founding fathers did this, that, and the other thing, and they're like this and they're like that. The very simplified version of it. But then you get into universities, and it's like, no, none of that's true. It's all garbage, and this is the truth. And so you're getting these conflicting ideas, and then you start reading, and you realize that there's truth on both sides. You realize that some of the things you were taught are just totally wrong, even though they were taught by teachers, and you find out that other things are totally wrong, but they're being taught by university professors. And so you start realizing, wow, you really do have to do your homework on stuff. And I think that's, what's very important for us to have that kind of a mindset that says, you know what, I'm willing to research and to learn things, mm-hmm. And I'm not going to just take things at their face value, and give that to everybody else as well. Mm-hmm.
So it's, and maybe I just didn't hear you say it, but like I'm after what is the, how to break having a narrative. And the thing is, like, you can look at it on a situation by situation basis, and okay, this is how you break the narrative in this situation. This is how you break the narrative in this situation. But how do you just become a person with no narrative? Because what you just described is a person with no narrative.
Yeah.
How do you become that?
Well, that's what I said.
How do you break the cycle of always having a narrative in a circumstance?
Well, you're the person that I'm talking to. I'm trying to break your narrative, in a sense, in the conversation. And that's how you do it. You do it by that way, is you have to break the narrative. You have to realize that there's nothing, sacred about what you believe, and everything can be, the number of times I have conversation with people and they say, I know you're going to think I'm sacrilegious when I say that. It's like, there isn't anything that to me is sacrilegious in that sense, because you can say what you want, you're not going to burn any hotter, if you don't believe in God and you say something, sarcastic or disrespectful about God, it doesn't make you, like more going to hell, so it's like, so fine, fine. But it's the idea of, well, I'm going to say this because I know you're a religious person. and this is going to affect you because I know how you feel. No, you don't. You don't know how I feel. You don't know anything about that. You just because I'm a religious person doesn't mean that I have some particular. And that's what I mean by breaking. How we break the narrative is that I try to respond in ways that are purposely non-religious. And to take the argument to places where non-religious people or religious people would normally go.
Sorry. So let me ask this question real quick, and we'll come back to this. Is it realistic to think that some people become guarded because of Christians trying to change the way the person thinks, despite if the person is wrong?
I wish that was the case. That there were so many people that are guarded against Christianity because there's so many Christians out there trying to change people's minds. I don't think that's the case, though. In fact, I think it's probably more the opposite, that Christians are having their mind changed more than they're changing other people's minds. That doesn't mean there's not a group of people, because there are. There's a small group of people scattered all over the world that are genuinely trying to change people's minds. But, the idea of being guarded because of Christians trying to do this, I think is a false assumption that there's this army of Christians out there, that are actually, trying to change people's minds. I know of a lot of false religions, people trying to change people's minds, like Jehovah's Witnesses. They knock on your door and they'll beat you to death. They don't care if you're a Christian. You tell them you go to church and that you're a pastor, right, and everything under the sun. I've been a pastor. I've pastored in 3 different countries, and they go, yeah, well, so what? That doesn't mean anything to me. Have you read The Watchtower? It's like, no, I haven't. Because I know the truth. I'm a Christian. I'm going to heaven. I don't need the Watchtower. I don't need to read your magazine. It's like, well, but you obviously don't understand this then. And it's just simplified, dumbed down. But that's just a false religion. That's not Christianity. And so to try to lump people like that, or Mormons, same kind of thing. To try to lump Mormons and Christians and Jehovah's Witnesses all in the same bag is probably it is a bad idea because it's not true. Christians are not Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. Christians are Christians. Mormons are Mormons. Jehovah's Witnesses are Jehovah's Witnesses. They all believe different things. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, I don't think so.
What if you were to change Christians to religious people?
Oh, probably. And I think that's, and so I'm sympathetic.
Yeah.
I'm sympathetic with that because I think that is true. Is that people do get tired of hearing their Jehovah's Witness brother, sister, uncle, nephew, niece,
yeah.
Constantly, barraging them with, their need to join their religious organization, and that would get wearying. Mm-hmm. Even in my case, I talked to my family about getting saved and giving their lives to Jesus, but I'm not barraging them and haranguing them into doing it, and so.
So, getting back to what we were talking about a second ago about the narrative, what I'm trying to get after, and again, maybe I'm just not hearing it right, but you're talking about what you just now, the last answer you gave was about somebody else's narrative. What if you are the person with the narrative?
Well, the same way. But so what I'm saying is the way that I deal with somebody about their issue of narrative is the way that you need to deal with yourself if you're going to break your own narrative.
I see.
Is they're both the same. It's the same idea. It's not different. You don't, you have to do that to yourself. Mm-hmm. You have to challenge your own thoughts and your own thinkings and taking things to their logical conclusion and challenging your preconceived ideas of things.
How do you know if you're a person with a narrative?
How do you know that?
How do you identify that?
Well, I would, when somebody says something and you are able to respond with a response answer that only comes from within your own head, you're probably a person that struggles with that for sure. Because this is like this. No, it's not. Well, that's just your opinion. The person who says this is like this isn't just trying to, force an argument. They're making a statement about something. And the better approach is to say, let's look at this. But if you're a person who has a narrative, you're going to go with your beliefs. No, it's not. It's not like that. You're not going to go with, okay, what's the evidence for this? Let's challenge this. Let's question it. Let's do this, like what I just described. You're not going to respond like that. You're going to, so that's, you can't, you have to stop. You have to stop thinking that what you believe somehow counts for something, because what you believe doesn't mean anything. Because number one, what you believe is not necessarily what you claim to believe. This is something that's, I think, very, very important.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, you might, like I mentioned in my last couple of sermons ago, Peter told Jesus, "I will never deny you." Mm-hmm. That will never happen. That's what he believed about himself. I will never do this. Not based on any kind of evidence, because he had never been in a position to where that was a possibility. And he said, no, I know what I would do in this situation. And that's a narrative. That's a narrative, because you're saying, I know what I would do in this situation. Even though you've never been in this situation, you don't even have anything to relate it to. You just know how it's going to be. And the reason is because what you believe about who you are as a person, and what you believe who you are as a person doesn't figure into it, because who you are as a person has never been there, never been in that situation. It's like saying, like for me personally, because I've never been to Indonesia. If I went to Indonesia, I know exactly how I would be. I know exactly how I'd be. When I get up in the morning, I'd walk out of the streets. I know what I'd be. I know the kind of things I'd be thinking about. I know where I'd want to go for food. That's just a belief. It's not based on anything. It's just a belief. And the truth is when I get to Indonesia, and then I realize Indonesia is nothing like what I thought it was, because I have never been there before, then that's going to open up right away that probably not going to do any of the things that I imagined myself to do. Because that it doesn't even apply. It'd be like, going, was it like Venice or whatever, if I went to Venice, I'd go out of the house and I would walk down the street, if you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have a street, it's just water, then you're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. And you might say, yeah, I'd walk over here and I'd walk over there and walk over there. And then you get to Venice and you're there and you look out and you go, wow, I'm not going to be walking because there's no sidewalk. So that's what I mean, is that it's that, it's just our beliefs. These are just our beliefs. They're not founded on anything. They're not based on anything. We may have had experiences doing this, that, and the other thing, but like Peter had never been in a situation to where he would be challenged for his following of Jesus. Not one time up to that point did he ever get challenged about following Jesus. Not one time, but he knows exactly what he's going to do, and because it's just fabricated. It's a narrative. It's just fabricated out of thin air.
K is saying if I had $1 million, I would travel the world. Narrative, aka prediction.
No, not a prediction. Saying, but the idea, if I had $1 million, I would travel the world. Until you had $1 million in your hand, you would not know what your priorities would be with that $1 million, because you may get $1 million. You have $1 million now, and for the next 6 months, you have to settle the estate. Okay, you're not traveling. You're not going to be traveling. You're not even going to be thinking of traveling. It's no way, because if I travel right now, I'll probably lose all this. So I'm not traveling. I'm not going to travel until this estate's settled. And so that's what I mean, and what I'm talking about is the idea of, it's just this idea that we make up. It's a narrative is a story. When it comes right down to it, that's the idea. It's a story. It's a story that we tell ourselves, and it's not based on anything. It's just a story. It's a story we make up. It's a fantasy, and we make up this fantasy. This is what I would do if I had this, and if I had that, or if I was over here and it was over there, or this was like this, or this was like that, and we're just telling ourselves a story. But the story's not based in reality. It's not based in anything. Mm-hmm. And so the result will be is that if that story is ever confronted by reality, there's every possibility that story is not only going to be untrue, it will turn out completely the opposite. and like Peter, Peter says, I will never deny you. Now, he denied Jesus worse than anybody else denied Jesus. He was 180 degrees wrong in his estimation of who he was. And that's the issue of narrative, is that it's just a story that we want to believe. And this is often, I find this often with religious people and with atheists, they're just stories that we tell ourselves, and we believe them because we've written, in our minds, we've written the story, and the story has a progression, and it has a beginning, a middle, and end. It has, various twists and turns and everything. And so we think this is positively, absolutely true, but it's not based on anything. We haven't based it. I see it when I read, I read Sapiens, the book Sapiens, is supposed to be the history of mankind, and boasting this really scholarly work, but yet there are several times in there where he just makes these wild assumptions, just absolutely wild assumptions based on nothing. I mean, literally based on nothing, not based on history, not based on scientific evidence, not based on anything. Just, well, people were here, and so people did this because that's what people do, and then this happened. And it's like, but you don't know any of this. There's no evidence for any of that. You're not even working with even small amounts of evidence. You're just simply making this up because it fits your story, your narrative. It fits your story. And okay, how do you know this? How do you know that this is how people acted? How do you know that 10, 20,000 years, that this is how people were, and that this was how people talk to each other? How do you know that? You don't know that. You just make it up, but you make it up based on people today. But the truth is that the way people talk to people today, scientifically, and observably, we know that people talk to people today differently than they talked to people 200 years ago. But you think it's going to be the same 20,000 years ago? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's not based on any kind of real observable evidence or research. It's just a story.
So how do you because like I said, the idea of being convinced is kind of the what the foundation of this, the goal of this is what do Christians do to convince people?
Well, I would take that a step further, and I would say, if you want to convince people of anything, it doesn't matter what it is that you want to convince them of. If you want to convince anybody of anything, number one, you're going to have to start with somebody who's willing to hear and to listen. If they're not willing to hear or listen, you're not going to convince them. It goes back to the beginning of what we talked about. And number two is that if they are willing to convince, to listen, it's not going to be hard to convince them of the truth. It's not going to be hard at all, because they're listening and they're wanting to understand. They're wanting to know where you come from. And so it's not going to be hard to convince them if what you're saying is true. I want to say something to somebody about, I'm just trying to think of some, kind of illustrative way of putting it. But, like, for example, I have I write, I've written software. And so, if I have somebody who wants to learn how to write software, I can say, okay, well, if you come with me, I can show you some things, and if they really do want to learn, then they're going to, okay, all right, so what does that symbol there do? And what does that thing? Well, this does this and this does that. And how about this thing over here and that thing? And we'll talk, and they'll ask questions, and then they'll be, okay, yeah, okay, I think I can do this. And because it's not hard to convince somebody of something that's, number one, true, if they're willing to listen, and that's always the case. And as a Christian, that's what I'm looking for, people who are listening. That's what I'm looking for, is I'm looking for people who are listening, who are willing to listen. Because if they're not willing to listen when it comes to, the ironic thing about being a Christian and talking to people about salvation is, the irony is, there isn't any issue in life that has greater consequences than whether or not God is real. But yet, it's surprising to me, and it doesn't happen a lot, but it's surprising to me the number of times that I run into people that they just don't care. I mean, they just don't care. And they don't believe in evolution or atheism or even religion for that matter, because it's something that it is a foundation for their lives. It's just a way to, have a sort of, to not overuse the word, but to have a story or a narrative, that when somebody asks them about it, they don't have to consider it. They don't have to think about it. They say, this is the story I believe. I believe the story is there's this couple of kids, Jack and Jill, and they ran down a hill to fetch a pail of water, and Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after, and that's what I believe. I believe that actually happened. But yet they're not going to look into it. They're not going to say, wait, is there really such a person called Jack? Was there really a girl called Jill? Is this really true? I mean, is there anything valid? Listen, hey, I don't want to talk about this. I'm just really, I don't really want to talk about it. And so you're done. You're kind of done, because it's like, well, you just told me that Jack and Jill are real people, and I'm asking you to give me a little bit of proof of that. And you don't want to do that. Well, that's because it's just what I believe. Okay, but it doesn't hold water.
What about people who don't realize their need? So they don't feel like they need to listen. How do you get past that and helping them? If you are only looking for people who listen.
Looking for people to listen is not looking for people who have a need. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about people who listen, they don't have to have a need. It's not necessary that they have a need. Just willing to listen. That people who are willing to listen in general, not willing to listen to you talk about God, just simply people who are willing to listen and to be able to have conversations, because that's we're not when I start a conversation with somebody like this happened to me, which very rarely happens. I have to say this. I mean, I'm talking in the neighborhood of probably, I can't remember the last time it happened off the top of my head. There was a guy who I handed a flyer to. He took a flyer from me, and he said, thank you, but I'm not interested. And I said, oh, really? I said, do you believe in God? And he said, I said, I'm not interested. And I said, oh, okay. I said, that's fine. I said, I just wanted to, invite you guys out to this, and it's about God. And he says, can you stop, please? I'm having a conversation with my friends, and I said, I don't want to talk about this. And I said, hey, okay, fine, no problem. And I walked away. But that is a rarity. That hardly ever happens. I was actually surprised that it happened. Because usually it's I don't want to talk about this because you are a certain kind of person. And then if I can push it a little bit, I can show them that I'm not a certain kind of person, and then we can have a conversation. And so it's not that I'm just looking for somebody who goes, yes, what, talk to me, please talk to me. It's can I engage in conversation? And if I can engage in conversation, then I feel that I have a very good chance of being able to convince them, or at least pull a few bricks out of their story, and so that they can, because there's no doubt in my mind that God's real. It's because it's not what I believe. It's not based in my belief system. It's well beyond my belief system. I have founded my life on this for 40 years in 3 different countries, and have moved several times in different cities within those countries. And it's not, and always there is this foundation. I don't pull scams. I don't do cons. I've been in situations where, I have to pay more in order to do something by doing it the right way, because some countries are crooked by definition. And so for me to do it right, I have to do it the way that the country does it, or else I'm not going to get it done, or I have to be as crooked as they are, and I'm not going to do that. But yet, always taking that path has always been the right path. Always, there's never been one time where it's been, well, if I had just been crooked here, that I would have been better off than I am right now. It's just never been the case, because these are principles, that you can base your life on. And so that's the, that I think is what's important, is to understand that, if you are a Christian, and I will use the word if you are a Christian, then that this is the truth. And if you know it's the truth, then it's not because it's become your belief. It's your story that you tell yourself. You will know it's true, and you will be able to tell other people that story. But not as a story, as a life story. Not just a fantasy story. This is what I believe. When I hear Christians talking to other Christians, they say, well, what we believe is, I know that they don't know what they're talking about, because you won't use that phrase in talking to somebody about Jesus. Well, what we believe, because what the other side of that is, well, I might be wrong, but this is what we believe. It's not, because it isn't what we believe. It's what we have experienced and what we have discovered and what we know to be true, and not just what we believe. And when I've had conversations with people that are very adamant. No, it's just your belief. It's just your belief, and I have to stop them and say, listen, you don't know me. You're just jumping to conclusions here. You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't have the right to say that it's just my belief, because you don't know anything about me. We've only been talking for 5 minutes. Would you like it if I sat here and told you all the things that you believe? And tried to define you, with a handful of words? Do you really believe that that's the right way to approach things? And sometimes, it's people, will say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. And I say, okay, so listen, and I, again, like I said, I always go to that. Hey, listen, we could pray right now. We don't even need to talk about this. We can pray right now, and that'll settle the issue, but you have to have an, oh, no, I'm not going to, I can't do that. I can't accept that. Okay, well, that's fine. But it's what you believe, not because you have tried and it didn't work or something like that. You haven't discovered that God isn't real. You just believe that, and without evidence. And so that's, you're not really looking for people who are listening from that standpoint, just people who are willing, from an intelligence standpoint, to be willing to say, I don't know everything, and maybe you know something that I don't know.
So let's talk a little bit about faith, and we're running short on time now, but so talk about faith from the perspective of an outsider listening to you. What is faith? It's just simple. What is faith? Because faith is something that non-Christians struggle with when they think about the idea. What does that mean? Because it's got whatever stigma around it.
Well, yeah, because the idea of faith is, the Bible says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So faith is a concrete thing, but in practice, unfortunately, and it's kind of down to the sort of religious approach to faith, is that faith is that, I've been involved with a family whose daughter was on the verge of dying, and and talking with them, and they have beliefs. They have a belief in God, but their belief is that I believe that whatever God wants, He's going to do what's best. But they're all really sad. And it's like, well, if you believe that God's going to do what's best, then why don't you believe she's going to get better? Isn't that the best? For her to get better. Is it just the that's all there is to it? Is that people just have to die when they get sick? And that is that better? And they, but they will call that faith. And it's like, well, how can you call that faith? If you're believing that God's going to do the best thing for your young daughter, then why do you believe she's going to die? Why are you there? Why are you not praying and saying, God, save my daughter. God, let her live. If you believe God does what's best, why aren't you doing that? And then believing that she will get better, and then looking for that, and praying and looking and praying and looking for that to happen, because that's what faith is. Faith isn't that we believe that God will do the best thing. That's a bit of a cop-out is what it is, really, because you can say, I have faith in God, and then when she dies, God's in control. If she lives, thank God. But either way, it's a win. No matter what happens, it's a win. And no wonder non-religious people have a problem with faith, because faith doesn't do anything. Not like that kind of faith. What does it do? It doesn't do it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the outcome of a thing. It doesn't do anything, And so there's no, like I said, that idea, faith, substance, evidence, these are very concrete issues. Mm-hmm. We don't have all the answers, and our faith may be misguided, but that doesn't mean that that somehow faith is nebulous. Mm-hmm. We may really be believing God for some specific thing, and that may not happen, but that's not, it's just God being God, and God does what God wants to do. No, there are dynamics involved in faith, that we may not, as I said I mentioned it the other night, that there are, that God's world functions on principle and rules. There's laws, physical laws of the universe, and I can believe God as much as I want that I'm going to fly when I jump off a 10-story building. I'm not going to fly. No matter how much I believe that I'm going to fly, it's not going to change a thing, because there is a higher principle, which is called gravity. And I'm not going to break that. I'm not going to break that with my faith, because it's not faith, there's a higher principle. But that's why I think, particularly non-Christians struggle with the idea of faith, is because faith is not, it's not this position that we have with God, that just says, well, God will do what God's going to do. That's not faith. And Jesus several times, he says to the disciples, the disciples are in the boat, we're perishing. And he says, where's your faith? In other words, do you believe that? I mean, do you believe I'm going to let you perish? Do you believe that's how things are going to happen? I'm just going to kick you to the curb, But he puts it in the context of where's your faith? Where's your faith? Because they were already convinced bad was going to happen, and that's what I'm talking about is people, well, God will do what God's going to do, but they prepare themselves for the worst, because they don't have any faith.
Kay's asking, does God test us during the waiting period while we're praying?
The waiting period. That's an interesting concept. I mean, there is a truth to that. There's always a waiting period when it comes to this, because it's faith is not something that we check the right boxes and then all of a sudden magic happens. There are factors that are involved, and those factors we stumble across often, but then in stumbling across them, we begin to develop an understanding of how God works and how God functions. And then the waiting period is not as necessary. The waiting period really, and there's nothing I want to try to, make sure that everybody understands, that the waiting period is not just simply God, setting some arbitrary time clock. The waiting period is it real? Is this real? And God knows where we're going to turn off. I believe God for the next 20 minutes, or I believe God for the next 2 weeks or 2 months, or is it just, I believe God and then I will leave it to God. And then all of a sudden God begins to move. That's what it is. And so there's no defined period of time. And as a Christian, that as you have been walking in faith, you'll find that idea of waiting is not even necessary, because you can pray and believe God for a thing, and that's it. It's over. You're believing God for that, and it's it. We've been praying this. I mentioned this girl. We've been praying. I've been praying for her for months now. For a complete recovery, and she's not completely recovered. And there's always that temptation. Well, maybe it's not God's will. Maybe this, maybe that. But I know that those things aren't true. Those are only temptations, because I know that's not how it works. And so I'm looking for something. I'm looking, is there some little sign, some little glimmer, that says, don't give up, and I'm always, and I, in praying for her, I think, I'm not going to give up on this, because I just don't feel that God wants me to give up on it. And it doesn't matter that there's a long period of time.
Okay. There was a few more things I wanted to get to, but We'll start with kind of this end point. There's a statement that Jesus raises from the dead in John 20. He shows himself to the disciples, but he hasn't shown himself to Thomas. Is like he's talking. He hears that Jesus is risen from the dead, and he says these words. He says, "Unless I see the prints in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my finger in his side, then I'm not going to believe."
Right.
And then Jesus shows himself to him, and he says, "Here, he shows him the nail prints, and then he says, you believe because you see." But then he says, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed."
Yeah.
First off, what does he mean by this? Is almost like another beatitude. Blessed are those who believe and have not seen. That's very interesting because Jesus disappeared not soon after that.
Yeah.
And was gone. So we no longer see Jesus in physical form.
Yeah.
Explain this whole idea of being blessed when you believe and you haven't seen.
Well,
what does that mean?
He's talking about he's talking about a better way of being is basically what it is. Anytime that Bible uses the word blessed, that's the idea. Is there's this better existence is the idea, and if you have to see everything, then you're going to be disappointed a lot because you're relying on your eyes. And I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that thought. I wonder if you're because we're talking about seeing is not believing, but then he says you see and you believe because you see. So I was anticipating that you were gonna ask me, isn't that a contradiction about the thing when you started?
You had a narrative?
Actually,
you have a narrative?
well, you were going there because you were going there as you were talking about it, and you were quoting it out, and so it wasn't a narrative because it wasn't.
I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
It wasn't. It was just I thought, wow, is he gonna ask that? Because he said that. I wouldn't
have read the whole scripture all the way through.
And well, yeah, exactly. I mean, but that was the thing I thought was quite interesting, and I'm in a way I'm glad that you didn't go there with that. But I would have been able to answer it anyway because it's not his seeing is arbitrary. He said you saw and you believed. Not seeing is believing. That's what he said. But you saw and you believe. But that idea of a better way of being goes back to everything that we've been saying. Is it that whole idea of being able to get past the limitations of your senses. The whole idea. Being able to see. If you don't want to see and you don't want to hear, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to make uses of those senses anyway, and so not needing those senses in order to believe is what he's getting at. Is the idea is that is a much more beneficial way to live. Yeah. Is to live with that understanding that you can be convinced without having to have your arm twisted.
Yeah.
And that's a better way to be because it makes it easier to learn more truth. If you're the kind of person that is always has to have their arm twisted into things. There's so much time in life, and so if every lesson has to be learned the hard way, you're not going to learn very many lessons. But if you can learn lessons easily by just simply, I believe this, what you say makes sense. I believe, like when the disciples are telling him, Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah, okay, cool, man. Well, I can't wait to see him. It wouldn't have to be this big thing of, I'm not going to believe because this, that, and the other. And then this big drama, my Lord and my God, and here he is. I mean, why is he saying that? He's saying that because he is feeling guilty for what he said. This is not a joy moment. It should have been, it could have been, but it wasn't, it was a rebuke moment, and he's like, he's saying my Lord and my God and, translated, I'm sorry, is what he's saying, and so he's missing out for that period of time, because I think it's another 7 or 8 days. He's missing. It's over. It's finished. He's got 8 days of his life he lost because he wouldn't believe. And then he had to see. How many 8-day periods can you go? Like that of things that there are to believe without seeing.
So in comparison to what we mentioned about Lazarus, the rich man and Lazarus, in the end, he's telling them, send somebody so that they can see, and then they'll repent. Tell them not to come here. Go tell somebody who came from this time and this realm.
Yeah.
And then Jesus saying, blessed are those who believe without having seen. does that mean that God places a higher value on people because this idea of being, blessed is my point. Is God reward that over the other? Is there like some kind of, God's hand on those who believe more than those who
no,
need to see?
I don't.
What is that?
Yeah,
I
don't. Yeah, no, that kind of goes back to our podcast on favor. And no, there's because now you're not talking about, we're talking sort of moment by moment. There will be a benefit. Yeah, there will be a benefit. It doesn't necessarily have to be favor, but a benefit that, people who don't have to have their arms twisted all the time, is the, it's just a much better way to be the kind of person who can just be open, to things and not be guarded and having to defend, yourself and things like that, or just simply being willing to be challenged and learn, from that point of view is so much better. And it is more beneficial. I wouldn't call it favor. Because it's just the benefit of it. I wouldn't call that favor any more than somebody who decides they're not going to go to school and somebody who decides to go to school, that going to school gave them favor. It didn't give them favor. I mean, it's not like, here, you've decided to go to school, here's favor. It's not that. It's just you are in a better place. You're in an advantaged place over other people. People who are not who are reluctant and defensive and everything has to filter through their way of thinking. All that, they always learn very slowly. Lessons that they need to learn that can be learned in a conversation can take them 10, 15, 20 years or longer to actually learn, because they have to finally be convinced after they've turned so many times around and gone back down that road that they were on that didn't lead anywhere, and then to turn around and try another road, and that doesn't work either, and and backwards and forwards like that, and you can lose years of your life like that. So, but it's not so much a favor. You just waste so much time.
Yeah. Cool. Very good. I'm done with questions. Great questions, guys. Thanks for throwing those in there. We invite you guys back next week, as well as tomorrow night. We will have service here in person. Come and join us in person. We are here. We are live. People do come to church, and you can come and join us and experience for yourself something that you definitely won't be able to experience online. And so we invite you to come tomorrow at 7:00. We'll be here, open the doors at 6:00 for prayer, and we will see everybody soon.